What's going on, movie fans? My name is Michael Weir. I love talking about movies, and today we continue on with our Saw franchise review series, talking about the 5th movie in the Saw franchise today. And this is a movie that holds a special place in my heart because it is the first Saw movie that I had a chance to check out in theaters. The previous 4 Saw movies I had actually had to sneak into the house because I wasn't allowed to watch R-rated movies, and my friend David loaned me all those movies. So David, if you're watching this, I salute you. And to Mom, if you're watching this, I could have been smuggling in worse things, so you got to give me that. With all that said, though, guys, let's jump into my review for Saw 5.
Hello.
And so, guys, Saw 5 is directed by David Hackle, and this would be his first and only outing in the franchise as the director for a Saw movie. Of course, the first Saw movie was written and directed and created by James Wan, and then the second, third, and fourth movies were all made by Darren Lynn Bousman, and I thought maybe there would be a shift or a tonal change to the Saw 5 movie after Darren Lynn Bousman had directed the previous 3, because you sometimes get that with directors, and there isn't. And I think that's a good and bad thing, because on the good side of things, it's, as a viewer watching these movies, it feels like one cohesive story and the style stays the exact same, even though the directors have changed 3 times now. And so as a viewer, that feels good. However, as a viewer watching this and kind of looking for the series to do something more, it doesn't, because the director chose the safe route. He chose the style that Darren Lynn Bousman had sort of set up for this franchise, and so it doesn't feel any different. So like I said, this is good and bad, because it feels like cohesive story writing and also cohesive storytelling, but on the other end of things, you have no new substance to this movie. It's just kind of more of what you got from the previous movies, but that's not to say that it's a bad movie. Let's get into the synopsis for this movie. Opening up this movie, you have Agent Strom showing up at the end of parts 3 and 4, which, as we talked about last time, are running concurrently at the same time, and so as those events come to a close, Saw 5 begins. And Agent Strom gets put into a trap. He ends up living in that trap and then making his way to look for the newest Jigsaw killer that he believes is Detective Hoffman. Now, if you're a fan and you're watching the movies in a row, you know it's Detective Hoffman, that he was one of Jigsaw's apprentices. It wasn't just Amanda that he was training to be an apprentice. He also had Detective Hoffman in his back pocket to carry things out after he died. And so you get Detective Hoffman versus Agent Strom for the majority of this movie. And I've always really liked that storyline. I've liked the Strom-Hoffman battle of wits and battle of will that you have in this movie. We're going to get into my likes and dislikes now, I guess, because that's my first like for this movie, is you have these two characters sort of going after each other or playing this cat and mouse game while there's an actual Saw game going on, and I like that. Another like I have for this movie is going to be Detective Hoffman's backstory, so he doesn't just get plugged into this universe and you're just like, oh yeah, this is the new apprentice. Like, they take time in this movie cultivating his apprenticeship, him showing how he met Jigsaw and how he had to go through a trap of his own, and then when he made it through that trap with Jigsaw, he then became Jigsaw's right-hand man. And you actually get to go back to the wire trap at the beginning of the first Saw movie, and you see how they set that movie up, and you see several traps that were set up along the way with Detective Hoffman helping in the background. And I just like that because I really enjoy those first couple of movies as they're putting things together. And then you see part 4 is really just behind the scenes of part 3, which I had a little bit of an issue with, but fine. We get to part 5, and then a good portion of the movie is Hoffman's backstory, so you still get a good amount of Tobin Bell as Jigsaw, even though we're in the 5th movie of the franchise and he died in part 3. So it's cool that they're still able to utilize their most important character in this franchise, which of course is Tobin Bell's Jigsaw. And the final like I have for this movie, of course, is going to be a spoiler, so I'll throw the spoiler tag up there, but the movie's from 2008, so you've been warned. But yeah, the spoilery thing that I want to talk about in this movie is going to be that twist ending. Again, I put it in the like category because I think they did a great job with convincing you the story was going one way with the characters, and then when they get to the end, part of the twist ending is that these characters that were all in a Jigsaw trap and having to get through together, and they were killing each other off one by one as they go through, you find out at the end that if they had just worked together, done a little bit of each trap to each other instead of making one person take the brunt of whatever trap they were going through. If they had just worked together, they would have made it through the game alive, and they could have all walked out of there with a little scrapes, a little bruised, but they would have been fine overall. But instead, they all had to perish through that game. And I like that twist ending, because that was something that I feel like the twists have majority of the time revolved around Jigsaw himself in the previous movies, but in this movie, since Jigsaw is dead, they focused that twist around the characters that you were following the entire movie, and I like that. Now, it's not to say that it's something wildly new to the franchise, because this franchise has had twist endings, but they were able to switch up what the twist ending would be toward the end of this. I thought that was cool. I do have 2 dislikes for this movie. My first dislike is going to be that if you're not a fan of this franchise, I could understand how you didn't follow along Part 5 very well, because Part 5 is very important that you understand everything that happened in the previous Saw movies. And I feel like 4 dipped its toes in the water on that, but 5 really goes all in on that. So I've heard people say negative things about Part 5 before, and I've never really understood it. But when watching it this time and watching them in order, I'm like, wow, you really have to understand what was going on with all of the characters in this movie in the previous 4 movies. Because if you don't understand what's going on with them, you're kind of lost. And so the movie doesn't stand on its own at all, which is fine if you're watching it as a narrative of all these movies playing out back to back to back. But if you're ever like, I want to watch a Saw movie, I don't think you would pick Part 5 off the shelf to watch it, because while it does have some cool traps in it, it doesn't stand on its own. It needs Part 4, it needs Part 3 at least. It probably needs 1 and 2 as well, so the movie doesn't stand on its own, and so that's a dislike for me. The other dislike I have is it's not really clear throughout this movie, as much backstory as they tell, it's not really clear where this movie takes place. Now, I've gone online, I've looked at it, and people have thrown in their own theories that the beginning and end of Part 4, which take place after the movie of Part 4, actually take place after Part 5, because Jigsaw says in that recording to Detective Hoffman, you are officially the last man standing, and I'm going to play a game. And you see Hoffman go through that in Part 6, which we'll get to in the next review, but there's just something about like the way they told that story in Part 4 that worked for me. But then in Part 5, it didn't really work for me, because the whole time you're like, all right, so is this now Hoffman playing his game? But then when you get to the end and it's just Hoffman and Strahm left, and then Hoffman makes it out, you're like, oh, okay, so the theory is that autopsy room with Jigsaw is happening after the events of Part 5. So again, it's kind of tied into my other dislike for this movie, is you have to be so invested in the franchise at this point to understand everything that's going on in Part 5. And it's just, like, that's annoying to me. I wish they had made this stand on its own a little more. Overall, I'll say Saw 5 is still a solid entry into the franchise. Even if you really need to be invested in this, I am someone that's invested in it. So for me personally, I think it's a solid entry into the franchise. For the casual moviegoer or the person who hasn't kept up with all of the Saw information to this point, I think you'll be a little lost in Saw 5 unless you're watching these in a row. If you're not watching them in a row, if you're not doing like a rewatch of all the movies, 5 isn't the one I would recommend. I would not recommend like, oh yeah, check out Saw 5. That'll hook you for the whole series. I would say that on Saw 2. I wouldn't say it on Saw 5 for sure. And with that said, guys, though, those are my thoughts, and that's my review for Saw 5. If you've seen Saw 5, I would love to know your thoughts and your comments in the comment section down below. Let me know your thoughts on it. Let me know if you agree or disagree with me on my thoughts, because it's important to me to know what you guys think. And finally, if you like this review, don't forget to hit the like button, because it helps the video, it helps the channel, and it helps me right here. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time. Alright guys, we got to the end of another Saw video, and it's time to talk about my favorite trap in Part 5, and that would be the Pendulum Trap. It's the very first trap that you get in this movie. There's something so terrifying about that pendulum swinging above you as it's going to saw you in half eventually, and the guy has to put his hands inside of these machines that are going to crush his hands into dust. But that's the sacrifice he's going to have to make. He has to let his hands get crushed, or the pendulum will cut him in half. And so he does let his hands get crushed, but the trap was rigged so that it wouldn't let him live anyway. And so the pendulum comes down and you see it slice him in half. And there's just something so just jarring about watching somebody get cut in half with a pendulum. They do it really well. It's my favorite trap from a movie that has some really good traps that I really enjoy. So the Pendulum Trap, it is my favorite trap from this movie. And guys, if you like this review and you want to check out more of the reviews on my channel, I've got all of my Saw reviews right there. Or if you like movie reviews in general, I've got all of my 2023 reviews right there.